Check, 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 check. You want to hear me there? There we are. Well, welcome to probably the first episode of Word of the Wild. I'm Jonathan. And this is my band. If you're listening in, this is my band. We did an album together. It's called Daffodil, Daydream. It's on Spotify. If you're interested at all. Today, I thought it would be some sweet content. Go through some of my, it's unfortunate. I only have 2 sermons from my past as a professional Christian. But we're going to go in and see what we got here in terms of my sermons. The very last sermon I did was a sermon on evolution. And it's... I haven't listened to it. I haven't previewed this. This is all just going to be spontaneous. And we'll see how it goes. Let's turn off the old... Oh, what a great song. Thanks, Rob. Alright, let's see what we got here. Here's my sermon, First Life and Evolution.
Oh, man. I've been looking forward to this. This is going to be fun. It was fun. I was studying some more when we were in Mexico, watching the kids work, and I'm over here on my computer. Just the way God intended.
So, I haven't figured out how to do this. But I'm
right,
not going to be able to respond to any chats or questions or anything like that. I don't know how to do it.
Okay, so I'm going to go through
let's
a
listen
lot
in.
of things.
So this is probably...
to be said before I start. So
this is probably 10 years ago is when I gave this sermon. And I wish there's video, but back then, my chapel, we weren't very technologically savvy. Now, since the coronavirus has hit, they've got every perceivable piece of technology available.
We talked about the beginning of everything. So, and the idea behind this whole series, as I understand it, is we want to give a reasonable defense of our faith for if you're coming from any worldview, and you need to start from the beginning. And some of the main questions are, like what Brett talked about, what is truth? Can we even begin, how do we even begin to start? You have to talk about truth, or else you can't really have a conversation. And then you're wondering, well, where did everything come from? Where does the universe come from? And so we talked about that, and Nate showed us that it's reasonable, and even more reasonable to think that there's a creative mind behind our universe, and that it couldn't just come from nothing. It had to have a cause, it had to have a beginning. And then, naturally, the next question is, well, where did life come from?
So, there was a bunch of other... This was a whole series that we came up with, nitty-gritty. That actually was my idea. I made this little graphic here. And we had a couple different of our pastors come up and did a whole series of sermons, and like I said in the thing, it was, one of them was, God, and then one of them was, the origins of the universe, and then I followed up after all those to touch on, and I volunteered to do evolution because I was very influenced by Kent Hovind, and just mainly Kent Hovind. He actually at this time in my religious history, I was very close to the end of kind of my deconstruction really having effect on my life. And this was probably one of the last things I was holding on to. I remember thinking, if it wasn't for Kent Hovind, I probably wouldn't hang on to this idea that of God or something, because there was, if evolution was real, that it would refute God, right? This is the idea that we're always talking about around here. And I remember thinking, Kent Hovind, he is so good, and he has all these just perfect arguments. They're impossible to overcome. And so I kind of took all of Kent Hovind's, and probably some other people's stuff, and combined them into a sermon for our chapel, which is probably, I don't know how many people show up. It probably I think there's 200-ish people in each service. There's 2 services.
Where did life come from? Because if you have a world that needs to be inhabited, we're getting to where we're at now, right? And so this is the next step, is where did life come from? Where did it come from? How do you get life from non-living things? And then is there a mechanism that can take simple life to complex life? And I'm not a scientist. I wish I was. That'd be kind of cool. But you know who else isn't a scientist? Bill Nye. Legitimately, he is not a scientist of any kind.
That's true. He is not a scientist.
I'm not an expert in any field of accepted academics. Does Super Smash Brothers count as academics? I don't know. However, I am an expert.
Still a huge
on
Super
the
Smash Brothers
evolution
fan.
debate. I'm a self-proclaimed expert on the debate and the debaters. I actually wanted to make for myself a deck of cards.
This is so funny. I still think this.
There's the 4 gods of the neo-Darwinian movement. There's these guys, and have them on the cards. The Jack would be Richard Dawkins or something like that. I would love to have something like that. I bet you they'd sell. I could probably make a bunch of money.
I should probably still do that. I bet you they would sell.
I've probably spent years and years and days.
It's a good idea,
watching
former Jonathan.
On YouTube, and I know all
Past
the guys. I know
Jonathan.
the arguments, and so I feel like I'm pretty well prepared to be able to do something like this, and funnel it down and make it something that is really helpful for you guys, and something that's widely accepted, something that's really obtainable and able to wrap your mind around it. So I think I'm really well prepared to do that. Okay, before we start again,
Get to it, John.
We live in a
Jeez.
unique time in history where God's people, that's us, if you follow Jesus, we're experiencing an enemy against our faith that we've never really seen before. And it kind of reared its head a couple hundred years after Jesus' time with a guy named Epicurus in Greek times. And
I don't remember talking about this.
He challenged the whole worship thing of their gods. And he said things like, nothing should be believed except that which was tested through direct observation and logical deduction. This is Epicurus back in 300 AD. And he says, well, we can't see the gods. We can't test it. So we shouldn't believe things like that. But now we're seeing these things really come to a point, and they're becoming very widespread and popular and angry, right, with a lot of these people. And there's a growing community of people that take this to an extreme, and they think you can't talk about anything other than what's natural and physical. Thank God, though.
So, I mean, even just there, the straw man of, because you accept evolution, you don't accept anything that's not natural, right? I mean, but and this is just me talking out of ignorance at this point. It's just there's so much more, in my head back then. There's the naturalists, and then there's the people who are the Christians, right? And the naturalists, they only believe things. You hear this all the time in the YouTube debate world, that there's got to be more than just the natural. There has to be. And it's actually hard for me to go back 10 years in time and kind of get into this head zone still. I'm still having a hard time where I was going with this. But even there, I'm already seeing, setting up the straw man.
That men and women of faith have stepped up, and they've become great thinkers, and were able to make a great defense and hit these questions with other hard-hitting questions, and show them that it's not, our faith isn't just we believe just because we have faith, and just because we don't have any evidences or anything like that, but we can make a really strong argument. We've seen it over and over. That's why there's debates, because there's still questions. There's never any certainty.
Never any certainty.
Okay, and then I wanted to show this goofy video just to keep it light.
Shoot, we're not going to be able to see the video. But there's never any certainty. I don't remember, I said I was a self-proclaimed expert on the debate, but we talk a lot about certainty these days, and the atheist community will say, rightly, you don't need certainty for knowledge, right? There's no such thing as certainty in science, right? There's always like a small chance that, sure, you could drop this cup and nothing will happen. There's a small chance of that. I mean, there's no way to prove that it won't happen, but, and this is kind of where I've come to over the years, is that it's true that us as a human species, we're just coming up with ways of knowing anything. Like, we're just looking around the world still. Just how are we going to know anything? And we've figured out certain things that we call the scientific method. And we've decided that there is no way to be certain, because how could you ever prove that if I drop this cup a bazillion million times, it will never ever not fall? It's impossible to prove that. But we do know that that's always what we see. We never see you drop something and it doesn't fall, right? Unless there's some other force, obviously, right? It's got a cup with jet engines or something. But we always see, right? It's like the classic, and this is probably a bad example, but the white swan, black swan thing. We only see white swans. So if you only ever see white swans, you're justified in thinking, sure, there's only white swans. But you can't be certain. You can never say there's 1,000% there's never going to be a different colored swan. But we found different colored swans, right? There's black swans out there. And so we have to change our mind and we have to update these things. And so there's never any certainty because things could change. But there's one thing that, so you have these kind of hierarchies of certainty. And this is what Dillahunty's always talking about. Like, whatever he says, proportioning your level of confidence to the evidence. So there's a lot of evidence that there's only, that when you drop something, it falls every time. So you can be very, very confident of that. But there's never certainty. But like, let's say, what's something like less, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Let's just move on. But that's something that I needed to mention. I mentioned that in this.
This is from a Monty Python skit that I love. And the reason I'm showing this
I
is
don't
not
remember
to
this.
be snarky or mean or anything, but I'm going to go through what I'm calling the chief weapons of atheism. And this is where I get that little saying from.
So, maybe I'll just skip ahead, but this is a... If you don't know what Monty Python is, it's really worth a watch.
That they'll use, and they'll just take them for granted. And they actually, and don't ever do this. Don't ever get into a debate about...
So, Monty Python, the Spanish Inquisition, and they run in and they, do weird stuff. It's really worth a watch. It's probably on YouTube somewhere. And there's the character that says, "Our chief weapon is fear. Fear and surprise. 2 weapons. Fear, surprise, and a almost fanatical devotion to 3 weapons." So he does this kind of funny little bit, Michael Palin. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but maybe I skipped it. Well, let's see where I'm going.
Whether they're an atheist or an agnostic or anything like that, totally unhelpful. I've never seen that have any fruit. Okay, but an atheist is somebody who doesn't believe in a God. Theism is a the, God, and a means not. Okay, so we're theists. If you believe in a God of any kind, you're a theist. So atheist is somebody who believes there is not a God. A naturalist is a little bit different. They might not be the same thing, but that's like somebody who's like an Epicurean person. They believe that there's only the natural, there's only the physical, there's no supernatural. So
the reason I bring up Epicurus is because at this point in my life, I'm a big fan of N.T. Wright. And N.T. Wright is one of his main things that I love is talking about the rapture. And the rapture to him is some sort of... It comes from an Epicurean view of things where... Again, I'm starting to get back into the zone of past Jonathan, of where like the world is good and no. Spiritual things are good and worldly things are bad, but that kind of contradicts what I said earlier. So, but this is what N.T. Wright would always say, and that's where the rapture comes from, right? It's like the earth must be bad, so God wants to take us somewhere else, some spiritual thing, and I don't know where I'm going with this.
Okay, there's also a secular humanist. You'll see a lot of
right.
these in the debates. This might be a little bit more.
So I'm talking about secular
good ethical
humanism.
was, I think it will have the power of the gods. Origin flies us into buildings.
Ooh.
Science is my safe continues on. And it's with scientism, which is
Scientism.
actually something that was, I think it was coined by C.S. Lewis. And it's something that he saw in his
good
day
quote here in a
and
second.
still continues on. And it's with people saying things like, through science we will have the power of the gods. Or like Michael Shermer might say, science is my savior. He said that. Victor Strenger says, science flies us to the moon, but religion flies us into buildings. Sitech says this. This is a side.
So somebody's laughing at that. I mean, that's a pretty. I wonder if that was me in my kind of, rebellious heart, just kind of saying something that I know is gonna hurt somebody's feelings. That's true, right? I mean, that's a pretty poignant thing to say. Religion flies us into buildings and science flies us to the moon. I mean, sheesh. That's kind of true. But I mean, obviously, we don't know all my views. That this is a brand new channel, but I still have a lot of problems with science and the damage it does in the world.
Tech, it's like this magazine says, forget faith, only science can save us now. So that's scientism. It's when you take science and you blow it way out of proportion and say it can answer any question of life. Not just the natural, but can also answer ethical questions or governmental questions. But for me, science is, it is just the observation of the natural. It doesn't give you what you should do. It tells you what things can do, but it doesn't really tell you what you should do.
So I still kind of agree with that.
So I might use that term in this whole conversation. Speciation is, so I'm defining this term because just saying evolution can kind of go over people's heads. Because, and this might shock you, but evolution is true up to a certain point.
Oh boy.
I might say, yeah, things evolve.
Up to the certain point thing.
But that
Classic
means
Kent.
Different things to different people. But speciation is when we say, okay, how do all the species happen? How was this world speciated? And then we need to talk about where that came from. Was that by some natural mechanism or was it something else? Common ancestry. Now, this is really the crux of the conversation where it comes down to. It might not be on evolution, but we will have disagreements on common ancestry. And this is where a lot of atheists and a lot of naturalists and a lot of secular humanists will accept the idea of common ancestry, that there was at some point like a great mother, first single-celled organism that over the span of ages and millennia, diverted into everything we see. Common descent. And even a lot of Catholics and Jews and other forms of Christianity will accept common ancestry. But that's where we're going to really focus our time here. These are not all the same thing, and I might use them interchangeably, though, but don't be confused.
And people were so confused. I remember at the end of the sermon, people just blank stares. I mean, people had no idea what I was talking about. I mean, and there's a lot of uninformed people in the wider school of, just evangelical churches in general, maybe even all churches, of what evolution really is. Because there's people that still think, if humans came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? I mean, those people are still out there. And if you're listening now, okay, you gotta look into it. Okay, if you're a Christian listening, and you think it's incumbent upon you that the gospel demands that you convert all infidels to young Earth creationism. That's what the gospel preaches, and I'm against that. But if you feel like that's your calling, you got to look into this a little bit more, because you can't do what we all do and build this straw man of this is what evolution is, and then destroy that when you don't know what it is. You got to know what they're saying. You got to know what the thing, and they're not saying that like monkeys that we know of them today evolved into humans. That's not what they say. So don't attack that. Attack what they really say, that we have a common ancestor way back, right? I mean, you gotta do that, okay, Christians, if you're listening.
Just want to make sure I'm not talking over anybody's head. I'm going to try to define my terms really well. Okay, now, for the chief weapons of theism.
Okay, here they come.
Of atheism, okay, and this is them here. Their chief weapons are Darwinian theory, which is this basically: random mutation and natural selection, and then
Did I say
time.
Randy?
They need those things, and this is the reason I'm doing this. Is I'm taking their weapons and being able to disarm them, because they'll come at you with a lot of different arguments, and we could go through all of them, but it'd take a lot of time, and I don't think it'd be as helpful as this, is to take their basic weapons and say, well, let's look at those, because they'll come up. These basic weapons will come up in a lot of their arguments, especially when, and today we'll talk about the origins of first life and speciation. They'll come
I had a
down
bunch
to
of
these
slides for
basic
this to make
two
it
things. Darwinian
really
theory,
laid out. I was really good
Darwinian
about
mechanism,
slides, images,
and
videos.
time. They'll come down to those
I was
things.
freaking tech master.
So let's talk about them right now. Let's get that out of the way. That'll be the most helpful way to do this. So, Darwin, the theory of common descent via Darwin goes basically like this. When creatures make babies, and we like this idea,
I wonder
right?
where I found
their
this
genes
stuff.
combine. My wife's really fascinated by this. If I have brown eyes, she has hazel eyes. How come we have a daughter with blue eyes? It has to do with your genes. And it's a genetic code that's in all things with DNA and all this random sciencey stuff. But sometimes, when those genes combine and some sort of crazy thing is writing out the DNA and copying it and combining it, mutations can happen, right? And you get laser vision, or you get claws, and you get, right? That's kind of our idea. But that's not generally, realistically what happens.
Okay,
Sometimes it's very subtle things.
It's all right.
Like back in, I don't know how long ago, but everybody had brown eyes. But then somewhere along the line, somebody had a genetic mutation, and they had blue eyes. And then that was a good thing somehow, and then it spread out. Now,
So I know where I'm going with this, right? I'm going
somebody
with
had green eyes, and then that spread out.
You know,
There's a genetic mutation that you can look around and see around you right now.
things can evolve a little bit, but they're not going to turn. This is what Kent does, right? Things evolve a little bit, but they can change eye color, but they can do all these things, but they can't turn a human into something else, right? Like a dog or a pine tree or whatever it is, right?
And that mutation makes them better able to survive in their environment. That's very important. Therefore, that creature will be able to survive better and then pass on its traits.
I remember I had visuals and
they
stuff.
Might have that beneficial mutation.
Little rabbits. I got some videos from YouTube.
So that particular creature will be able to naturally
copy and paste
naturally selected to survive better. And its brothers and sisters that are not as fit to survive are naturally selected to not survive. So Darwin observed, and this is like the very beginning of all this craziness. Darwin observed in the Galapagos Islands that there were finches there, and they were very similar to the finches in his area. But
the old finches.
They were also different. That they were very well adapted to their risk in their different islands. Some islands had a lot of bugs,
I'm gonna do the pine
so
tree
the finches
thing
would have little thin
here.
beaks, so that they could get out the bugs in the little holes. And some of these islands had nuts, more nuts, and then these big thick beaks to be able to crack open nuts. So he goes, well, we have European finches on our island. Maybe these finches all are related to that finch. And this finch has a completely
I know exactly where I'm
and it's
going
good for
with
maybe
this.
eating bugs and nuts. And then one of his families, of these normal European finches, had babies, and the baby had a mutated beak that was bigger. And that particular baby finch is going to be able to survive better than a finch without a big
So
beak.
I'm going to say, you know,
Its chances are better
I'm
of
going to say,
food,
and I know this
therefore
because I did this
surviving
sermon,
better,
but I know that I'm
therefore
going to say
passing on its genes of having a bigger
the
beak
beaks
to its family.
changed, right? Of course, we know that the
eventually,
beaks changed, but they changed
that
at the end of the
family
season or
of
something.
big
They changed
finches will
back,
take over that
right?
whole island
And
over
therefore,
a long period of time. Or it could go the other way.
evolution has
Finches will have
limits.
smaller
It
beaks,
can't just
whole
keep
beak
going,
much
right?
bigger,
There's going to
and
be
then
some
over
sort of
millennia,
point at which
the
it
smaller
stops, just like
beaks
Kent
survive
says,
the
right? There's
mutation,
dogs, and
all
you can get
sorts
bigger
of
dogs, but you can't get
Here's
there's a
the
limit.
problem is
You
that's
can't get the
all
dog the size of
generally really
Texas,
good
right?
science. And I think all of you would accept that.
So that's where I'm going with this.
That's good science. It's true. It's observable in real time. We can see it happening generally. But it becomes a theory when you begin to say, because of the Darwinian mechanism of random mutation and natural selection, that a finch can then become a non-finch. That's where you step across the line of what I see as science into something else.
See, there's the classic Kent Hovind thing right there, right? And it's a good argument. And I remember this was the thing that really propped me up in not accepting the theory of, and I even said the theory of evolution. And right, for you people who don't know me, okay, I identify as a Christian, okay, because I love the things that Jesus said. I think he has the best things to say to humans as a culture and humans as a species to date, right? I've never seen anything more radical and more important than the things that Jesus has said. But if you're a Christian out there that think that you need to, that this threatens your religion, this idea of evolution, this is a good thing for you, because I'm when I say, here's another example of how I came to accept the theory, right? First of all, when I said theory, that was like a dig on it, right? Because a theory to us is like, it's just a guess. When we want to make something up and take a guess at something, like we'll say, okay, so I bet you if if we go to Disneyland or whatever, and I'm talking to my wife, then our kids are going to throw a fit, and I was like, oh, it's just a theory, just a theory. This is the kind of context we use the word theory in, and it doesn't mean that. In science, a theory it's like the highest level that an idea can have. There's no higher level than theory, right? There's like hypothesis, and that might be a little lower. I don't know much about this kind of thing, but I know that a theory is the highest level that an idea can get to in science, right? Like gravity is a theory. Germ theory is a theory. These are things that are widely accepted. And the Christians, the Kent Hovind Christians out there, they don't want to accept this one theory because they want to take the Bible literally and just do damage to the script, do violence to the scriptures, and twist and turn them to make it say what they think. And and this is threatening to them. They'll accept every other theory except this one. And I think that's a little strange. And I didn't realize that when I was saying this. So I was throwing out the word theory because I think that's a win for me. It's just a theory. Okay, Christians out there, that's not a win. Okay, theories are, that's the highest standard of knowledge that we have, is a theory. Again, and that's not certain. But it's the best we got. There's no higher level of confidence that we can have in anything but a theory, okay?
And you say, because we observe the Darwinian mechanism taking place of natural selection and random mutation, therefore a finch can turn into a non-finch. That is where you step beyond the boundaries of science. You step into scientism, or you step into what some people might call a religion of faith. You have to have faith to see that, because then the next thing comes in, time. You say, well, we can't observe a finch turning into a non-finch. Well, given enough time, you would, but we can't observe that. You cannot go back in time and observe that happening. So
And I
you've
mean,
gone beyond the reaches of
and
science.
that's kind of true. I
So
mean,
don't be like shocked
what do you
if
want?
somebody says to you like evolution's true. It's great. You go, yeah, I believe it. But then once they step beyond that boundary, then you can start like making the argument. But it's okay to say evolution is true, but only so far. Only so far. People evolve, things evolve, but then there's also the distinction between why do we have to use the word evolution? Isn't the word adaptation just as good? Doesn't that make just as much sense without going beyond the
Well,
boundaries
yeah,
of
I mean,
science?
it's the same thing. So, I used to think that this was a good argument, but the way that the thing that I didn't understand back then is that it's true. Okay, you can't observe directly a finch turning into a non-finch. Okay, but you just can't, because humans are, and every evolution is going to say this. We just too small of a window to see it. We've only been doing science for so many hundreds of years. We can't see it. That kind of big scale evolution. Okay, but when we're trying to determine, we're trying to come up with the best accounting of all the evidence. And we got all these dead animals in the ground, right? We keep digging up these new animals, and we keep digging up new species and wondering, well, where do they come from, and why are, and you put all the evidence together. And the crazy thing is that Darwin, when he came up with this, he didn't know that we'd find all of these fossils that we have today. And I'm convinced that they do support the theory that creatures all have a common ancestor somewhere, right? Because there's simple organisms at the bottom and they get more complex. Yeah, and I know that Kent and Standing, they all want to say, well, of course, because in the flood that the dumb ones are down here. And I mean, but buddy, you gotta, that's such an easy out. And it's not, it's more consistent with the theory of evolution than it is with the flood. I just don't get why you would think that that's a good answer to that. The fish are already at the bottom, and then at the same time you want these just titanic cataclysmic events of the oceans of the deep blowing up, and the sky falling down and the ice canopy breaking and all this stuff. Wouldn't that mix everything up? And so we open up the earth and we find humans down here with ancient things, and then a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and then a rabbit, and then a cow, all in the same. I mean, doesn't that make sense? If you've got everything shuffling around, why is it so consistent across the whole planet? You'll never find a cow in the lower layers. You just won't find. You won't find anything except what's consistent with the theory. Okay, and I know there's just no way around it. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, and but okay, so a finch can't turn into a non-finch. Okay, I get it. You can't observe it, but there's a lot of things that we can't observe that we understand happen. Okay, it's just the best we got. It's the best question. It's the best answer to these questions that we have as a human species. We're trying to figure this stuff out. Okay, and for you Christians out there, you got more important things to do than to pick holes in the theory of evolution. And I mean, you just got better things to do. Go out and love and serve and do justice in the world. That's what we need to be doing. We can't be just getting in the way and making people think that the Bible and Christianity depends on if evolution's true or not. Because this is what is making people like me lose their faith and not want to go to church, is because it's become us versus them, as opposed for us, the Christians, as the chosen people of God to love and serve the world and to bring his justice and mercy into the world. But we've turned it into, if you don't believe in the flood and in special creation, that you're going to hell. That's not what Christians should be doing. Okay, and this is what I'm all about here at Word of the Wild, is trying to unite the Christians and the evolutionists. Okay, we gotta unite as we are. You are humans. Okay, we are God's creations, the Earth's creations, and we got to take care of this planet, and we got to find better ways to do. We got to find ways to get along, and poking holes in the theory of evolution is not the way that. Did Jesus do that? No, he didn't. He went around and kicked booty.
The other problem is this, and there's a great YouTube video that you can watch, and I encourage you to do it. And this is a very important video for I think everyone to watch. It's this lady. Her name is Dr. Georgia Purdom, Purdom. It's called Beneficial Mutations, Big Fairy Tale. Okay, so now we'll get into the
I'd
the
like
small.
to
So
check in on this lady
mutations.
again. So
how
what,
far does it go? Does it work
what this
or not?
is it was a TED
So
Talk that I
mutations,
saw,
the big problem
and she points out this is the thing about information, right? You can't ever have a gain in information with the theory of evolution. It doesn't.
If it's true that there was a
Right.
single-celled organism that
This is where this part's going.
that single-celled organism has genes. It has DNA. It has some sort of code that writes to create that. And if you're going to say that that can somehow turn into something else, you need more information. You need to be able to add information to that genome. And so they say, well, through the Darwinian mechanism of random mutation and natural selection, you can get this genome to get more information. But that is not shown to be true. Mutations are never shown to add information. They're only, and this is interesting, so let's go through this. Okay, there was a guy named Richard Linsky, and he'd been breeding bacteria since I was born, since 1988. And he found out that this bacteria can survive better than its parent strain over 20-something years. And so some people go on to say, see, this study shows that over the span of time, random mutation and natural selection can make you more able to survive. It can change your genome. You can add information and become better to survive. But what's really going on? What's really going on scientifically?
What is
this
really
is
going
called
on,
the
John?
Escherichia coli. I think I have that in here somewhere. And this is, they say it gained fitness compared to its parent strain. So they had this bacteria, and then they breeded it over millennia. Well, it's actually 20 years or so. And through the process of it passing on its genes, randomly mutating, and then being naturally selected to survive better in its environment, they say that it evolved, and it became more fit. But here's what really happened. It became more fit to its own environment only due to the loss of information. The loss of information. What happened was...
this is a big talking point in the creationist world, right? It's talking about information, talking about loss of information. Okay, I don't think that, and I definitely didn't understand the idea of information, right? It's not like you can calculate it, right? But we've had people ask people this on modern day debate and all this stuff. How much information is in a genome, right? And how much is lost? How much is gained? And how do you quantify this kind of thing? And it can't really be done. We don't, especially people who are going to talk about evolution in the way that you hear me talking. We don't know. We just know that we just say there's a loss of information. But if you just go by, and again, I got to get some people on here and ask them about it, professionals. But there's more to it than just numbers, right? There's because Gutsy Gibbon just put out a thing. It's not, if you just go by the number of proteins or whatever it is in there, like, I think yeast has almost as much information in its genome as humans do. I mean, so and they think that we're more complicated, obviously, than yeast. But when we talk about gaining and losing information, it's not what you think it is. It's not like a book. right? It's not like, I mean, in some ways it's like a book. I'm just talking out of my butt here, but I've realized that it's not. I don't know as much about it as I thought I did. There's not. When you say it's losing information, it's kind of a misnomer because when you have a thumb drive, there's so much space in this thumb drive, okay? And when you plug it into your computer and you put a song on there, it just changes the information. There's not a gain or a loss of information. The information's all there. There's like only so much information that can be stored in there, right? Like a gig, right? You get a 1 gig flash drive, you plug it in, you put a song in there. It doesn't like all of a sudden gain more information. It just changes it. So when they plug it into the next computer, it reads it and goes, okay, there's a bunch of empty. This kind of data reads as empty. This kind of information reads as empty. There's nothing in here. But this information here means there's a song in here. And then it can play it back to you, okay? And then if you delete it, it just writes over it and changes that information to empty. It doesn't mean it's not there. It just means it's empty. So there's not like a gain and a loss. It's a change. So when you hear me talking about this, I don't really know what I'm talking about. And I don't think that the people who are on this side of the fence know what they're talking about either when they're talking about information.
To pass on their genes, and then this mutation of sickle cell anemia becomes widespread. And they say there's your proof of evolution. Yes and no. Yes, it is a beneficial mutation. Yes, it is a Darwinian mechanism. But no, that does not mean that common ancestry is true. Those do not add up. Okay, so now we've shown that.
So now I'm talking about the sickle cell anemia thing, and we haven't really talked about this much. I don't hear people bringing this up very much, but where you guys, hopefully you guys are aware of this, but sickle cell anemia it's calculated to some people as a loss of information, right? It's not a gain, but again, that doesn't really mean anything. Okay, it's the information changing, and the only difference between me and my goats is that information, right? And this is the route that T-Jump takes when he talks about it. He doesn't do many evolution debates, but when he talks about it, he goes, the only difference between this creature that evolved into this creature is DNA. Is there some mechanism we know that changes DNA pattern this to this? Yes, and that's natural selection and random mutation, right? And that's all we got. That's all we got. We know that happens. Everyone accepts that DNA can change. Everyone accepts that random mutation, natural selection happens. And it is hard to believe that it turned what they like to say as a rock into humans, right? And I'll just say this as a preview. I don't. There's something in the Christian mindset that humans are special, and it's in the Bible, right? That God made humans in His image, and they're special. And we take that as license to trample on the world and to, stomp on bees and other critters because they're not like us, right? Because we're special and God loves us and doesn't love everything else, right? There's something in the religion that has that. And I think that's wrong. I think that God made His world to all work together, and it's all equally as important to Him, or He wouldn't have made it like that, right? And when in Genesis He made humanity, He made us in His image, which doesn't mean that God looks like us, right? I think the best way to understand that is, and I think a lot of the Bible is like this, it's attacking, it's giving a polemic against the other surrounding nations, right? Because the tribe next door is saying that the world was created through a God taking a dragon and ripping it in half and throwing its remains down, and this becomes the earth, and this is this, and humans are this organ, and they're on the planet for whatever reason, right? And the Hebrew writers come along and say, well, I don't think so. I think that humans are the image bearers of God, because your gods have images, and they look like stone and rocks and sticks. I guess stones and rocks are the same thing. And twigs and, whatever. You make them. They're fake. They're something that you made. But Yahweh's images are humans. All humanity is God's images. All of humanity is God's images. They're his idols. That's the same word. Idol and image is the same word. This is what the story's getting at, right? And it gives humans a greater level of responsibility to take care of the world, because we are representing God. We are God's images to the earth, on the earth. And that's the only reason we're special. I don't think God thinks we're more important than the other creatures. But I'm already hearing in my head, well, then why did Jesus only save the humans? I think we need to see it as God wants to rescue humanity so that he can reclaim his humans as his images and save us from our destructive ways. That humanity has become destructive force, and we've turned into, and you'll see this a lot, you'll watch this in the Bible Project, we turn from what they call human, son of man, into a beast, where we just destroy and take advantage of and are violent and claw and tooth and all this stuff. And God wants to rescue his original intention, is that humans take care of his world and they have a relationship with God and with the earth and with each other. That's what I think we need to focus on. And it's not that humans are special and more important. It's that we have a job to do, and we haven't been doing it. And God wants to rescue his humanity for that purpose. But like I was saying, we're not that much different than the rest of the creatures. It's just a matter of the pattern of the code. And we have consciousness, but my goats have a certain level of consciousness. They know what's going on. They like, every time I come home, I slam the van door. They know that's me, and they want to see me, and they make annoying sounds. So I come over and move them somewhere else so they can eat something else. I mean, everyone knows that you look into your dog's eyes. They love you, and they know you. And it's really tempting to say, oh, it's just instinct, and it's not real, right? But how do you tell the difference between the love that your dog has for you and a love that my baby has for me? In a lot of ways, a dog's love is more tangible than a baby's love for me. But somehow the human love is more real in some way. I know this isn't going to be convincing, but to me, this is things that have changed my mind over the years. Is I'm seeing God has made all of his creation special, and humans are not special. Humans are special in that we have the capability to destroy all of God's creation, but we can't see ourselves as above and beyond everything else, and that just because we're able to think and do math, that we're somehow special. Okay, I think when I look at my goats, I see them as more in touch with God than I am. But that's for another episode. I'm skipping a lot of this. Let's keep going.
Do that. It's a very complex thing for some sort of weird structure of particles to do, to pass on its genes and to split. So you can't even get to the point where the Darwinian mechanism of natural selection and random mutation can work on something, because it can't pass on its genes. It can't split. It can mutate, but then it can't pass that on. Even if you could prove that a single cell, a single replicating cell, can form out of nothing, out of dead cells, you still need to show that that is going to be able to add more information to that. That's their weapon that they're going to use.
So there's the information thing again.
We've seen these things can form, and then maybe they can combine and create an outer cell wall and the nucleus and all these things. Okay, maybe.
There's another
Maybe.
Jack Black
But
reference.
at that point, you need the Darwinian mechanism, and we've shown that it is not effective. It's not going to add more information. It's not going to help you get from a single cell to a more complicated thing. You need that to say common ancestry is true. Now, here's another bonus one. Okay, we talked about random mutation, natural selection.
So, here's something else that comes to mind. We can't, as Christians, make arguments based on things we don't know. It's not a good way to say that we know things. It's so easy to say, it's impossible that a single-celled organism could turn into a multi-celled organism, right? This has been coming up in debates recently, that they've done this in the lab. They've seen single-celled organisms turn into multi-celled organisms. And here's another thing I'll throw in, is that one of the things that led me down the path of the devil and Satan and falling away and all that is learning that my body is comprised of more bacteria than cells. The thing that I would think of as myself, like my own cells, my brain cells, skin cells, and all this stuff, there is more bacteria inside of this thing than there are of cells, like skin cells and tissues and organs and things. So this thing that you're seeing right here, it's more something else than it is me. But that is me, right? My body is like, all of our bodies are like a planet. It's like it's a biosphere full of different creatures all trying to get along, right? And trying to create things, and it literally is like a planet, right? Inside of your intestines, there's countless other creatures living and thriving and dying and loving and living and singing in the moonlight, loving in the whatever the song is. And shoot, where was I going with that? Oh yeah, single-cell bacteria turning into multi-cell bacteria or organisms or whatever. Somebody brought up recently in a debate, and I thought they should have pressed this point, is that humans start out as a single cell, a zygote, or is that what it is? And then they multiply or whatever, and they turn into a multi-cell thing, and then you are what you are now. That's evidence, isn't it? This is what we can observe, is a single cell turning into you, with the input of food, nutrients. A single cell turned into a human. It was that kind of thing that started me thinking, maybe this isn't as crazy as I thought.
That they must have all come from one grandmother single-celled organism over the span of millennia. And you'll see this a lot, and people will say, well, of course it's observable. You could observe it. Biology is based on evolution. And they'll make this stand. They'll be like, biology, the science of biology, only works if evolution is true. It only works if evolution is true. But what they really mean is that biology is based on adaptation. Yes, like viruses and things like that will adapt to their environment and they'll change, but viruses do not turn into non-viruses. That's like biology and that kind of.
And this is true. I'll kind of give myself a half point for this. Is right, like when you're talking about biology, well, maybe not like biology, but you're talking about like virology. In biology, in some ways, we talk about, okay, we know that this virus is going to adapt and turn into something else. So that this field of science is based on evolution. But not really, right? It's more based on adaptation. We know that things have changed. So the Christians, not the Christians, but I gotta come up with some word for this. The Kenthovenites get a point for that. Okay, they're not based off of the whole thing, right? But in a way they are. Because a lot of these sciences are based on that they come from a long line of other creatures, and our genome has traces of that, right? So when they're looking at, they'll talk about the lizard part of your brain. They'll talk about things like that, right? These are things we have in common with other creatures that have an effect on medicine. They have an effect on psychology. They have an effect on different biological things. I wish I could have a biologist in here to confirm this, but I'm pretty sure that there is a certain sense in which all of these big sciences are based on the idea that humans were once not what we know of as humans today. There was something else, some other kind of mammal.
To be insufficient. And in conclusion.
Am I done already?
In conclusion, yes.
I doubt it.
If you're versed in debates, you'll know that this whole thing that I've been doing is actually a big no-no. Because I've only been making negative arguments. I'm saying this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. If you're going to do a good debate, you need to make
I remember I was
arguments.
over time at this point. I was like
if
scrambling.
theism is true, we would expect, like Genesis says, that animals will give birth after their own kind. There's a positive argument. Is that true? That's all we ever see. Finches give birth to finches, bugs give birth to bugs. It never happens anywhere else. Yes, a dog can be as big as a Great Dane and as small as a Chihuahua, but it's still a dog. It's still a dog. If you dig, here's another positive argument. If you dig in the ground, you'll only find fully formed animals. You're not going to find any transitional species, and we can talk about that at a different time. 3.
Huh. I did something weird. That's an interesting thing I just said.
Information, like we talked about with genes.
So, obviously, I'm aware that, and this is a big thing for me right now that I'm thinking about starting this channel, is I want to point out to the Christians that maintain that you need to believe that evolution's not real. You need to understand that you're very similar to the flat earthers in this way. And a lot of them, unfortunately, are flat earthers, but the ones that are not flat earthers, like the Kent Hovens of the world, they don't believe the earth is flat. But you guys have the same tactic in proving your points, and it's to poke holes in the opposition and not really to make a good model. I know that Standing thinks that he has a good model and they're making predictions and things, but the majority of their thing is just poking holes in the other thing. And I want you to notice that's the same tactic that the flat earthers use, is they never come up with their own model. It's like pulling teeth trying to get a flat earth map out of these people, because they know once they come out with the map, it's under scrutiny, and they're not prepared to defend it. Right? We're all aware of that in the YouTube debate community, and I think that some of these guys that make that like Standing and Kent, that want to poke holes in these things, you got to come up with your own model. You gotta figure out this phylogeny thing. You got to tell me which animals were on the ark. Okay, come up with a number. And if it's wrong, then your theory's wrong, right? Or, I mean, you can keep changing it, but, I mean, that doesn't look good for you, right? And I know that science changes its mind, but it's different somehow, okay? You gotta come up with that number. Okay, you gotta say, and this is a big problem that I've noticed, that I've been thinking about, is the phylogeny challenge. This is one of the things from Aaron Raw that put me over the edge to accepting common descent, right? It was that. It was also seeing that picture of his emu, okay? If you haven't seen, I was just talking with Snake about this. If you haven't seen that picture of his emu, it'll freak you out, okay? This emu, all emus, I think it's an emu, you lift up their feathers, and they have tiny little chicken wing arms, this big. And they're fleshy, and they're completely useless. But they are vestiges of wings or arms or whatever the heck they are that are useless now. And they're not going to use them for mating purposes. They're completely useless. And that to me was like, okay, that's it. Why would God? This is not good for. And I was already kind of ripe for the change, right? But then you see like a cassowary or an emu at the zoo, and they have dinosaur legs. Like they got claws and scales on their legs. These things really disturb me. And you hear the sound that these emus make. They sound like what we think dinosaurs sound like. Okay, go to the zoo and look at that. Okay, but let me get back to this point. Poking holes in the theories is a sign that you're on the wrong side, in my view. Because that's all, this whole sermon is just that. It's just poking holes in things. It's not really understanding things at a sufficient level. And it's just like the way that flat earthers do things, right? They don't understand gravity. They don't understand, like saying the thing about like genetic information. There's only losses of information. There's never gain. That's the same as saying, as holding up a basketball and pouring water on it and watching the water go whoop and fall into the ground and say, see, I've proven it. Water can't stick to a ball. Therefore, the earth is flat. Okay, they don't know what they're talking about. And the Kent Hovind Christians out there don't know what you're talking about. And I feel like I can say this because I was this person. I just refuse to really dig into it. I never really looked into it. I never really said, okay, I'm going to take a day, a week, a month, a year, and really look at the theory, okay? I never did it. Because I didn't want to. I was so set in my ways. I was so convinced that it could never be true that I didn't bother. And that's a classic tactic of being on the wrong side of that certain debate. You gotta, again, standing, and you can't hold Christians out there, come up with a model. How many animals were on that ark? Was there Archaeopteryx on there? Was there a Troodont on there too? Was there, these are separate things. There was a bird, right? But at what, the line between, a Troodont and those crazy birds that we have flying around today that have claws and teeth, the line between those is very small. Which one was on the ark? Come on, man. Come up with a model. This is a big problem for you. Okay? Now come on my show. I think the sermon's over. But that's okay. That was very boring. Golly. What a disaster. Is it not over?
Can only come about by an intelligent agent. That's what we witness in the world.
Do I have to? Oh,
Anytime
there's probably like the
it's
music.
Always by an intelligent agent. And then lastly, the secular humanist, the neo-atheist, the naturalist, their worldview is going to be vastly different to that of a theist. And they're basically saying that humans are basically just really highly evolved apes or animals. What's the difference between that and the biblical worldview? That God sees humans as his children, his images, his kings and his priests, his partners in the world for stewarding his creation, his beloved, chosen, wonderful bride. See the big difference between those two worldviews? That's I think that if I was going to get in an argument with atheists, that's where I'd make my stand. It's on worldview. So your worldview teaches us this, but here's what the Bible says. You're not just an animal. You're an image-bearing, wonderfully created human being that Jesus wants to save you and make you a king and a priest. And then we'll close with this verse. This is Revelation 5:9-10. This is our verse for our high school team.
I still agree with that, right? I still think you can have both. I still think you can have that wonderful sense of the images of God and still keep all of the good things about, without rejecting the whole fields of science, right? I still think you can have that. And it's true that I don't, and this is going to get more specific as this channel continues in my, let me adjust this. In my, oh dear, in my, the problems that I have with the scientific endeavor is that we need to keep this kind of vision of humanity. We need to keep that, but we need to keep it in a sophisticated way. We need to keep the idea that humans are, we're special in that we have this thing called consciousness. We have hands. We have language. We can do much damage to our planet, and we can, but we got to do good. We got to keep that. We got to keep these things together. We know that that God, the earth, whatever you want, has birthed humanity and has given us brains and hands and language. But I think it needs to be based on and have a metaphorical substrate, a la Jordan Peterson. That we need to see ourselves as Adam from the earth, and Eve, life-giving, made from dirt, and will return to dirt. And that we are in charge of our other creatures. We are inevitably linked to the other creatures. The thriving of the planet means the thriving of the human species and of other species. And I think we need to somehow merge these things. So there's some weight of this on for the YouTube debate world, the atheists. You need to understand what they're saying as in terms of this worldview thing. It's kind of weak on that. It's kind of weak on the metaphors. It's weak on the stories. Humans need stories. We need stories to tell. We need stories to tell ourselves. And the story can't be, we were once monkeys whacking each other over the head and dragging each other by our hair and blah, blah, blah. That's not going to do. As much as it might be true. And I know that was unsophisticated and clumsy. Okay, but we need stories. Humans, and this comes from your worldview, okay? Humans have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, whatever it is. It's in our genomes, it's inside of our bodies to live and thrive on stories. It's what keeps us going. And we need to keep that. We need to find new ways to tell new and better and greater stories. We need to keep this. We need to keep this idea that God made us, the earth birthed us. And that this Genesis story is about God, the world is his temple. It's not trying to say, don't take it so darn literally. You make it mean nothing to me. When it says the Bible was created in 7 days is an inauguration number. Okay, the temples all inside the Bible are inaugurated in 7 days. The world is God's temple, and he wants to take care of it. And he sets up images in this temple. And they're humans. We're all in charge of this thing. And this is the power, to me, of the Bible, of the scriptures. We need to maintain that. And Christians, you gotta get out of the way. And you need to find better things to do for the world than try to convince people that science is wrong. Okay, we need to all join together. We're all humans. We're all creatures on this planet trying to figure out what's going on. And the best way we've come up with to know what's real is the scientific method. That's all we got. We're all creatures trying to figure it out. Let us figure it out. But Christians need to major on that, to me, the actually important things. Love and mercy and justice. We need to major on those things. And don't make it about the science. The science, to me, is not... It's important in that it's telling us truth, but there's things more important than truth. And we'll have to flush that out in a different episode. But there's things like... There's people out there suffering. There's people out there that... There's religions out there abusing people and abusing their power. There's political structures out there. There's empires out there that are abusing their power. And just like Jesus, he came into the world and he's speaking truth to power. He's equipping people with parables. He's casting out the demons. We need to do these things and not walk around YouTube and poke holes in theories. Theories. Well-established theories. Okay? I don't really have anything else to say other than that. So, let's shut it down. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. I appreciate everyone for being here. I don't know if there was anyone listening at all. I won't be able to check. But we've got more coming down the pipeline. I have very exciting guest on next week that I'm very, very excited for. That is going to be incredible. It's going to be... I mean, he wrote these books on Paul that that changed my whole thing. I mean, it's really going to be amazing. Dan Utschorn. So stay tuned next week for that. And thanks for tuning into this episode of